Steve Cohen had some interesting things to say as Mets spring training gets underway. Francisco Lindor may miss opening day, and Juan Soto is going to play a different position in 2026. Welcome in another edition of the Bleav in Mets podcast. That's Jack McKessie. I am Chris Schubert, here to talk all things New York Mets baseball. Apologies, the Super Bowl claimed Jack for about a week and a half, so we had to delay recording, but we are back, ready, excited. It is spring training. You're seeing the social media clips. I don't think we're going to get to this at all during the show, so I'll mention it here at the top. You got Kodai Senga, waving to the cameras and talking about how all his goals are for spring is to just stay, and not injured and stay healthy. There's just some great content coming out of social media and out of spring training. Jack, how are you, my friend?
Chris, I'm getting real excited. I feel like after the 2025 season ended, my vibes were low and my excitement was low for the 2026 Mets. After this offseason, seeing all these guys show up to spring training, seeing Bo Bichette, Juan Soto's back, Francisco Lindor's back, even if he's not actually playing. Freddie Peralta's out there, Kodai Senga's out there, Sean Manaea's out there. Hearing comments from guys like Justin Willard, hearing Francisco Alvarez is in the best shape of his life. I'm excited, man. I'm ready to go.
There is nothing better than the preseason in whatever sport, in this case, spring training of baseball, and the best shape of their life tweets that you get. There's nothing better
100%
than those. I always feel better. You mentioned not feeling great at the end of 2025. I always feel better after listening to the owner of the New York Mets, Steve Cohen, and that's exactly what we got today as we are recording this, yesterday, for when you're listening to this in the podcast feed, because Steve Cohen met with reporters. And the one thing about Uncle Steve is he's an open book. He'll answer just about everything that he can when he's asked about state of affairs for the New York Mets. And I think there are two comments that really kind of leaked out from this media scrum and took on a life of their own. There was a lot that he said. He talked about, Edwin Diaz and that free agency pursuit. He talked about Kyle Tucker and how they thought they had a really good shot there. Lots of things about, Carlos Mendoza and David Stearns. Like, he really kind of covered all of his bases. But I think the two quotes that really, jumped off the page for a lot of people were when he was asked about the Dodgers. He called them a formidable team, said that they have the ability to spend, but very quickly reminded everybody in that same sentence, so do I. And I want to start there because, Jack, that didn't feel like a tongue-in-cheek kind of like flaunting his financial muscles because he knows the reputation of the New York Mets. But that almost was this is ticking me off that I keep losing to these guys, and I'm going to make sure people know that we can spend money. And that felt like somewhat of a warning for the future. At least that's how I took it.
I think so. I would take it the same way. I think it's the whole Kyle Tucker thing and how that went down. And I think even more the Edwin Diaz situation, where it was very clear that the Mets were in on both of those guys. And it just kind of felt like in the end, they both ended up choosing LA over New York. Obviously, we've talked about it, like LA's back-to-back World Series champions. There's a reason for that. But I think with the Bo Bichette signing for $42 million a year, and now with this comment, it feels very much, like you said, not flaunting, but he's just trying to remind pending free agents, guys that might be hitting the market soon or about to hit, a period where they need to negotiate an extension, looking at Tarek Skubal in Detroit. This is a guy that is willing to pay out the big bucks for players that he Bleav can really help this team win. We saw it with Juan Soto last offseason and Bo Bichette this offseason. And I'm willing to bet that going forward, bar whatever salary cap situation we see in 2027, he's going to continue shelling out money to put together a roster that he wants to win. One of the other comments that stood out to me, Chris, was when he said, I'm tired of losing. Like, I'm sick of it. And it's annoying me and it's keeping me up at night. Like he said, he went to bed mad after the Kyle Tucker decision. He's a guy that's going to do what he can to put a winning product on the field. And we've seen it the last 5-6 off seasons now with him as the owner.
Yeah, I mentioned that this season is the 40th anniversary of 1986 and basically said that's too long. It's too long in between championships, and that's our goal here every day. And I do think that the offhand comment of like, so do I, right, in terms of having money to spend was also, again, I don't think it was a taunt to the rest of the league or a taunt to the Dodgers. I think it was just sort of a message to the fan base of like, when we identify a player, when we think there is a player out there that is a perfect, ideal fit to this team, we will do whatever it takes to land that player. And sometimes it doesn't feel that way, right? Pete Alonso leaves to go to Baltimore. Edwin Diaz goes to the Dodgers, right? They miss out on Kyle Tucker. It's Yamamoto in years past, right? It's Roki Sasaki picking the Dodgers over the Mets. And again, Sasaki, that wasn't a money battle, but just in general, the Mets always being on the short end, or at least it feels like always being on the short end of this stick. It felt like Steve, with the way he said that, was trying to remind the fans of, relax. Don't worry. This is not going to deter me from spending money. The losing's not going to deter me from spending money. I understand what it takes to compete with that team. I understand what it takes to be that level of good consistently year in and year out, and we'll do it, right? That was kind of a wink to the fan base of, don't worry, there's more where this came from. And that was my main takeaway from it. The other comment that I think was drawing a lot of eyeballs yesterday was him saying that as long as he owns the team, there will not be a captain. And
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a really interesting discourse because there are so many people, we've, I think, talked about it here on the pod, about Francisco Lindor being named the next captain. Now, I will say him bringing this up and being asked about this and talking about a captain does sort of kind of give credence to the rumor that was out there that there was some type of disagreement between Brandon Nimmo and Francisco Lindor about, there not being a captain and Brandon maybe wanting to be the captain, but Lindor kind of being the de facto captain. There's always been that kind of rumor out there that there was some tension between those two because of that. This kind of felt like it fed that a little bit, but I also kind of like it because baseball nowadays, and I don't know if you feel this way, Jack, but baseball nowadays, it's so transaction based. Where what I mean by that is guys don't stay in one spot forever. They're always moving around. And so the idea of I'm going to pick a captain and he's going to be the captain of this group, but then next year he's supposed to be the captain of a totally different group in some cases doesn't always feel like it's correct. And captains in baseball, it's a ceremonial thing. It's not like in hockey where the captain's the one that talks to the official and gets an explanation and has that back and forth. There is no appeal to it in that regard. So I kind of like this comment. I kind of understand it. And hopefully it puts to bed any conversation of like, listen, this team's going to have leaders. They don't need to have somebody that has a C on their jersey or is named the C. There's going to be leaders on this team. It's going to start with Francisco Lindor. It's going to start with Juan Soto, and it's going to trickle down from there.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I really liked Steve Cohen's sentiment here of there doesn't need to be an official captain of this team for the team itself, the fans, the front office, whoever, to know who the leaders of the team are. And we've seen it over the last few years that it's Francisco Lindor. Mets haven't had a captain since David Wright. And obviously now under Steve Cohen, they're not planning to have a captain. I mean, I just think it's clear who has stepped up and taken on those leadership roles. And it can really come from anywhere, right? Juan Soto's a guy that came in last offseason, has embraced a sort of leadership role within the team. I think to some of the younger guys, hearing how guys like Christian Scott earlier today was talking to reporters about the feedback he was getting from hitters like Juan Soto, like Marcus Semien, another
who struck out, by the way. Juan Soto, who he struck out, by the way.
And just hearing that kind of vibe of each team, each year has a different identity from the year prior. And I think this offseason especially, and going into 2026, the regular season, that is especially evident with how much shakeup the Mets roster had. And you think about what would have happened if a guy like Brandon Nimmo had been named captain and he ended up elsewhere, and the void that a lack of a captain would have created, what kind of situation that would have created for the Mets with turmoil between Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto fighting over the new captaincy, or, whatever situation could have come up in a weird political, social situation like that. And I think Steve Cohen's comment about the lack of a need for a captaincy on the Mets while he's the owner really jives with what Francisco Lindor said on Sunday when he was talking about, look, like, we're all teammates. We're not the best of friends, but we're good teammates, and we're all here to get behind the same mission. We're all here to win a World Series championship. We don't necessarily have to be the best of friends. I don't necessarily have to be the captain. He didn't say that. That's kind of my words, but they're all there for the same purpose, and the leaders are going to show up naturally. And I think not only guys who have been here, like the Lindors and Juan Sotos, but also guys like Marcus Semien coming in as a veteran player, guys like Bo Bichette, who have kind of been that locker room or clubhouse presence for the Blue Jays in the past. I think the idea of not having an official captain kind of makes it so everyone can kind of be a leader in their own way. And I think that makes the team congeal a little bit better. There's no hierarchy within the clubhouse.
Quote, as long as I'm owning the team, there will never be a team captain. That was my decision. My view is the locker room is unique and let the locker room sort it out year in, year out. That was what Steve Cohen said to the media today. And yeah, I agree with a lot that you said there. It's kind of a arbitrary thing in general. I think it's an antiquated thing, especially in the sport of baseball. There aren't many teams that have captains in baseball anyway. But I do think when around the time that David Wright was getting his number retired, there was kind of a conversation of would there be a passing of the torch? Would there be a new captain named kind of surrounding that event or in the, aftermath of it? And there was that video that got put online that made it seem like Francisco Lindor was going to be named the next captain of the team. And I do think it's good to kind of put this to bed and let the natural leaders of the team develop without there being any type of pressure. Speaking of Francisco Lindor.
I had one quick thing, though. I was
Sure.
interested in the timing of this comment. Like, I don't recall Steve Cohen ever making a comment about captains and whether or not he was going to name anyone, or Mendoza was going to name anyone, or any previous manager was going to name a captain in the past. And I wonder, I mean, I guess I just wonder why the timing is now that he's saying something like this, because of maybe some of the off-season discourse that there's been around the rift that might have been in the locker room between Nimmo and Lindor, with Soto coming in and like not following Francisco Lindor on Instagram or whatever. Like, I just thought the timing was very interesting because I don't remember him saying anything previously about whether the Mets should have a captain.
Well, and I do think the culture of the team was so under a microscope this offseason with the moves that they made, who they let walk and who they brought in, and how culture and clubhouse presence felt like a huge priority for them in what they said publicly and also what was written from guys like Will Salmon and Ken Rosenthal and Buster Olney and the like. It felt like this was going to be a question that was brought up in terms of culture and clubhouse and leadership and captain. And this feels like, I mean, we don't, Steve Cohen doesn't talk to the media all the time. He's more available than most, but he doesn't talk all the time. This was his chance to talk. And I'm sure it was brought up like, hey, you guys made a lot of changes to the leadership, to the infrastructure, to the core. Culture was a big deal. And I'm sure this was kind of an off branch of all of that. Speaking of the, de facto captain, but he's not really the captain, Francisco Lindor. This happened while we were on a little bit of a break, but Francisco Lindor broke the hamate bone in his hand and will probably be okay for opening day. Timeline-wise, it feels like he could be available for opening day, but if it is an opening day, it will be very quickly thereafter. A tough injury because the issue with this is the power that it kind of zaps for you for the first couple of months. And so I think for those anticipating another, 25, 30 home run season from Francisco Lindor, you may have to temper those expectations a little bit. It feels like a second half power surge will be coming for Francisco Lindor. I did see the memes on social media about how, Francisco Lindor doesn't play well for the first 2 months of the season anyway, so we're not going to notice the difference, or it doesn't matter that he's hurt for the first couple months of the season because he normally struggles. I get it. I understand where that's coming from, but it just means Francisco Lindor is going to be kind of behind the eight ball when the season starts. So I do worry about how long it takes for him to get up to full strength. But he's out there, he's working out, and I think he's going to do everything in his power to be ready to go for opening day. In the meantime, Ronnie Mauricio has been getting most of the reps at shortstop. The Mets had an infield drill today that had Mark Vientos, Brett Beatty, and Polanco rotating in over at first base, Simeon at second. It had Ronnie Mauricio at short, and Bo Bichette over at third. So it appears as if Francisco Lindor would need to miss some time, that it would be Ronnie Mauricio who draws in for short term. And again, short term, we're talking maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. I mean, he won't miss the first month of the season with this injury. He'll be in the lineup pretty soon.
Yeah, it's a weird, like, pandemic of hamate bone fractures going on right now.
Lindor, Corbin Carroll, and
Jackson
Holliday. Yeah.
It's very, very weird that all happening at the same time. I believe the hamate bone is the popular bone that a pitcher breaks when they punch a wall after having a frustrating outing. So
have I shared my theory? I shared this on social media. I don't think we talked about this. My theory as to why these may be on the rise.
What's the theory?
So I am not a scientist, nor am I a doctor. So I'm just going to put that disclaimer out there now. This is just me guessing.
Okay.
But the bone in question is the bone right here by your pinky, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in general, the pinky is the weaker of the appendages that you have on your hand, right? More susceptible to a break. And I do wonder in this era of exit velo and bat speed and swinging hard and pitchers throwing harder, that there's a tendency to grip the bat tighter, and that's putting more pressure on that bone in both hands, and it's leading to this. Now, again, I don't know. I'll leave that to the professionals in those fields. But I was just kind of thinking about, like, why are we seeing that more when you're doing the same thing you've been doing your entire career, which is swing a bat? But apparently with Lindor, he's been dealing with this on and off for a number of years, and it reached a point where they felt like they needed to go in there and clean it up, and this felt like a good time considering the recovery time and how close they were to opening day.
Yeah, I remember when the news first broke, it was kind of like the Mets are still weighing options on whether they're going to let Lindor have this surgery. And I think the decision is the right one to just kind of figure this thing out. The timing kind of, like you said, works out perfectly where 6 to 8 weeks, he should be ready by opening day. And if not, it'll be a week or two. A couple of takeaways that I had from this. I think Francisco Alvarez, either last season or the season before, also broke his hamate bone. And we saw that power dip from him in a big way when he returned from the injury. But then, it got a month later. I think it was around the time that he got sent down to AAA and then came back up. Power was back. And I'm not concerned that Lindor is going to have a complete power drought for the season or like long term. But yeah, like you're going to have to expect more of a 15 to 20 home run season, I think, from him, a lot more than the 25-30 range. And, given, like you said, his struggles in the early season, it might not be a big deal anyway. But I was interested hearing Carlos Mendoza say that the plan is still to have that Lindor, Soto, Bichette top three of the order. He kind of doubled down on that in beginning of spring training comments. We're going to have to see how that shifts around. I wonder how much the Mike Tauchman thing might come into play. Not that he's a long-term top of the order bat, but his on-base percentage kind of gives you the road to have him be in that leadoff situation potentially if Lindor misses time. But the big thing that I was very interested by was Bo Bichette, previously a shortstop, was not taking any reps at shortstop. The Mets are very locked in on having him play third base. Even if Lindor misses time, they're willing to go to other options like the Ronnie Mauricios rather than resort to pulling Bichette back to shortstop. I think they really, really want to focus on having him get used to third base defensively and playing that position long-term for the rest of the season. Even if, this situation where Lindor should be a lock at shortstop, if he's injured, they're not going to move Bichette from third base. They really want him playing there and getting used to it for at least this year, maybe the next 2 or 3.
I think if Francisco Lindor was going to miss the entirety of the season, then I think there's a conversation of Bo Bichette sliding back to shortstop and playing his natural position, and somebody like Mark Vientos or Brett Beatty drawing in as the everyday third baseman, because you're doing that over the course of 162. When, again, I think at most we're talking about 10 games, and there's a decent chance he misses 0 and he's actually in the opening day lineup. You don't want to waste time when Bo Bichette could use every rep that he can at third base. And by the way, I'm seeing all sorts of defensive fundamentalists and experts on social media break down the drills that the Mets social media teams are posting about Bo Bichette. And everybody's a critic. Everybody's an expert on how to play third base defensively from just the drills that we're seeing on social media. But you want him to get every single one of those opportunities to work in at third base and also to work with Kai Correa, who's going to be the architect of this Mets defensive plan in 2026. And you want every single ounce that Correa and Bichette are working together to be on making him the best third baseman that they possibly can. So not surprised. That is Ronnie Mauricio who's drawing in there. He's the guy that's capable to play that position. Bichette, I say long-term, for the 3 years that he signed here, is going to be the third baseman of this team. And so I think they really want him focused on that. Speaking of players playing different positions, it's so weird to me how we can just go in a whole offseason, a whole winter, and we're like, all right, Kyle Tucker's not really a natural fit because he plays right field. They got Juan Soto out there. Cody Bellinger makes way more sense because he is a left fielder. They've got a need out there after trading Brendan Nimmo. We could do a whole offseason about that. And the Mets pursue Kyle Tucker, and we're like, yeah, he's a great player. They would have made it work. They'll figure it out. Show up to camp. David Stern sits down in front of a bunch of microphones and cameras and says, yeah, Juan Soto's playing left field next season. Out of just completely out, literally out of left field, Juan Soto is playing left field next season.
Literally, like, the first media availability David Stearns had back at spring training was like, all right, 2 big things, going to get the hamate bone surgery, and also Juan Soto is going to play left field for us this year. Sounds like it was a mutual decision. Like, Soto's preparing for the World Baseball Classic and was taking some reps in left field, And it sounded like he's more comfortable out there. I mean, we talked about it in the pre-show, Chris. That's the position he came up playing when he started with the Nats. He played a year out there with San Diego as well. I think he played some games there with
Mhm.
the Yankees as well in
Maybe.
2024. Yeah, it looks like he got 52 innings in left field. So not a ton of time recently, but back in 2023, 1,300 innings in left field. And I was looking at his fan graphs, and it looks like there's about 1,000 inning difference. He's played right field 1,200 more innings than he has left field. But his left field numbers from outs above average and fielding run value are significantly better in left field than they are in right, with a -8 outs above average in left, which is not great, but it's -24 in right field, and then -12 fielding run value in left field versus -29 in right field. So I don't hate it, especially if it's a mutual decision and he said that he wanted to do it.
I love it. One, because it confirms why they were pursuing Kyle Tucker, because they were just going to stick Tucker in right field. Like, this was their plan all along. But two, I'm going to say this, and this may come back to bite me when he makes like some critical errors out there in left field. I think left field at Citi Field is easier to play. Like, I just think in general, it is easier to play left field than right. Right just feels like it gets engulfed in right center field way too often. Where if it's Carson Benj, if it's Tyrone Taylor, if it's Mike Talkman out there playing in right field, you feel like you've got more athleticism for somebody to go out there and make a play. Where with Soto, left, he can just kind of stay out there. Luis Robert can cover him in the gaps, and things can be relatively okay. I mean, listen, Soto long-term is a DH. I just don't know when the Mets are going to, pull the plug and make him the permanent DH. I think they want to see if he can get better defensively. And Juan Soto strikes me as the type of player that is going to want to pop off and have just one really good defensive season. Like, just to show everybody that he can do it. And the fact that he clearly seems to be on board with this, feels like something that he said he was fine with, said that he'd play anywhere the team would want him to play. This isn't a Rafael Devers situation where he's saying, no, I don't want to go there, and the Mets already have a problem on their hands.
Yeah.
We'll see. The Mets have told us defense is important. It was important with who they got to play second base this season. It's important with who they got to play center field. It's important for some of the players that they've acquired, like Bo Bichette, who's good defensively. That Mike Talkman, the guy they just added today as we're recording this. Like, defense has been a major priority for this team. And they clearly must feel that is going to be a benefit to them overall with their team defense. Now, there are going to be some places where he plays left field that you are going to be worried. Like, there are going to be some ballparks where he plays left field, and it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about how the Mets have said all offseason defense, and the left side of their field right now, like pure left side, is Bo Bichette playing third base, a position he's never played before, and a guy who had literally the worst range at shortstop last season, and Juan Soto in left field for the first time consistently since 2023, who's already an experiment in the outfield in general, just a coin toss if he's going to make the right play. That said, I feel way better about the right field situation with either Tyrone Taylor or Mike Talkman playing out there, Luis Robert in center field, Marcus Semien on that right side. Like, I feel really good about the right side now. That left side I am already like sweating a little bit thinking about what kind of issues might arise during the season.
Let's close the pod by talking about the right side, because I'm going to say on the air exactly what I said to you in the pre-show. And I'm going to try to phrase it exactly the same way, because I think it's going to punch the point home. The New York Mets, and David Stearns in particular, are doing everything in their power to pave the way for Carson Benj to be the right fielder without making it like a true competition. But they've also fielded enough competent options to where if Carson Benj needs to be in AAA, you feel good about what they have. Like, I'm sorry, but Carson Benj can beat out Brett Baty, Tyrone Taylor, and Mike Talkman to be the starting right fielder of this team. He is a more talented player than those three. But if he needs more time, you like what Brett Baty, Mike Talkman, and Tyrone Taylor could give you out in right field. And Mike Talkman, who they signed to a minor league deal here today, a good, solid defender, has a 360 on base percentage over the last 3 seasons, had like a 350 on base percentage last year. Just a high quality veteran depth option for this team. Signed him to a minor league deal, and I'm sure he's going to show up to camp and have an opportunity to try to win this gig and compete. But it feels like, hey, Carson, the job is yours, but they're kind of just a little tiny hedge of, okay, we need to have some quality major league options just in case, because Fangraphs came out and Carson Bench was a top 25 prospect in the sport. So, like, if he has a good spring, it's going to be his, like, clear as day. But if he doesn't have a good spring, if they don't like what they see, they want to give him some time in Syracuse, I think we'd be okay with Tyrone Taylor starting in right field, or Mike Tauchman starting in right field, or however they decide to draw it up.
Yeah, over the last week, I've just loved the depth decisions that the Mets have made. Like, MJ Melendez is another guy that we haven't even mentioned yet, but like that is a signing, super utility guy. Mike Tauchman as the right fielder, also a lefty batter, which I think is huge if Benj is not ready as another lefty. I think last episode when we were talking about what the lineup looks like, there weren't a lot of lefties out there, and adding Tauchman, adding Melendez, having that extra bit of depth just in case Carson Benj isn't ready to take up the mantle on right field.
Doesn't Mike Tauchman feel like just a poor man's Jesse Winker?
Yeah, I like the on base a lot more with Tauchman than I did with Winker, but Winker had the power.
Winker's got the power. Winker's got the vibes of the clubhouse and being a leader, right? In that regard. But it just feels like everything they wanted Winker to be, Tauchman is. Like, can get on base, but he plays defense, right? Like, you can trust Tauchman out there in the outfield, where with Winker, it was like you were worried about sticking him out there.
That's what I'm saying is, like, I really like what the Mets have done to kind of, they have a safety net in place in right field just in case Carson Benj isn't ready. And, like, Benj is still a young guy. He struggled a little bit in AAA last year, but he rocketed through the minors over the last couple of seasons. And I am on board. I'm a lot more on board with what the depth pieces look like for the Mets going into 2026, because there is clearly a vision here, and I am with it with David Stearns. I think this offseason is starting more and more to look like a home run.
Well, you look at it with, like, adding Ben Rortvedt and Austin Barnes on minor league deals to be your backup catcher in case something goes wrong there. It's about some of the non-roster invites, like Craig Kimbrell to the bullpen, taking dart throws there. Like, it's having maybe not, awesome all-star level depth, but it's having high-quality, major league experience-filled depth at some really important positions, and it's some worthwhile dart throws. And I'm sure you'll see the Mets have a couple more of these as spring moves on and as they react to different moves across the league. That's going to do it for us here on this edition of the Bleav in Mets pod. Good to be back. Good to have Mets baseball back in our lives. We are just a few short days away from the first spring training action of the season, and I cannot wait to see some Carson Benj in my life. Can't wait to see him out there making plays and hopefully winning this right field job. We'll be here to break it all down as the spring unfolds. In the meantime, do me a favor, do us a favor, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening to us. If you want to watch the show, Jack McKessie, McKessy on YouTube is where you can watch the Bleav in Mets pod. That will do it for us here on this one. We'll talk to you guys next time. And as always, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.